It's hilarious.
Well, I'll admit people as they come in, but it'd be fun to get started for the folks who are here. And I just want to thank everybody for being here on another edition of the Big Texas Read. Really excited about the conversation that we're going to have tonight. And just want to get some thanks out of the way just real quick. We love getting to partner on the Big Texas Read with Gemini Inc. and David Samuel Levinson. We've been doing this since the pandemic started, and it's been something that we've looked forward to, you know, each month. And, you know, one of these days, we're not going to be on Zoom. We're going to be in a standing room only bookstore in Dallas or San Antonio or Austin, and it's going to be great. But for now, this is what we have. And it's so fun to find literary community, even in these little tiles that I see on my screen, you know, these little tiny. I only know Alexandra is like this tiny, you know, and David is this tiny, you know, little person. But, you know, we want to thank Interrobang Books here in Dallas, who supported us from the beginning. Also, the Twig Bookshop down in San Antonio. I always love to mention Lone Star Literary, who puts out notices across social media and on their website about the Big Texas Read. And then also UT San Antonio Library System as well has also been really great about helping us spread the word about the Big Texas Read. Writing Workshops Dallas, we're up here in Dallas. And then of course, I just want to let Alexandra say a little bit about Gemini Inc., which always has so many exciting writing events and seminars and everything else. So I'll turn it over to Alexandra, and then David can introduce our special guest tonight.
Sure, no, I just wanted to chime in and say, this has been such a great space for us to keep literary community going and bring great authors into your living room, kitchen, you know, whatever room you happen to have your laptop or computer in. But Gemini Inc. is, you know, San Antonio's Writing Arts Center. This is our 27th year. And our mission is to teach the craft of writing to people of all skill levels so they can bring their stories to life. And I think Antonio is an amazing example of someone who really brings his stories to life, as well as Oscar. We've had, you know, we've done programming with Oscar in the past in San Antonio, and it was just really wonderful to have him. So I think we have two powerhouse writers here, and I just can't wait to see what kind of dialogue they have. And we're so glad you made some time on a Friday night to be with us.
Hear, hear. I'm David. I will introduce these two powerhouses. And we love that you guys are here. And we love that Oscar Cásares, I said that right, correct?
Yes,
Oscar?
yes.
Oscar Cásares is the author. He will be moderating, by the way. Oscar Cásares is the author of the story collection Brownsville and the novels Amigoland and Where We Come From, which have earned him fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Copernicus Society of America, the Texas Institute of Letters, and earlier this year, the Guggenheim Foundation. Congrats on the Guggenheim, by the way, that's awesome. His writing focuses on the US-Mexico border, where he grew up and his family began to settle in the mid-1800s. His essays have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Texas Monthly, and on National Public Radio. He's a creative writing professor at the University of Texas at Austin. And for our featured author, Antonio Ruiz-Camacho's debut collection, Barefoot Dogs, won the Jesse H. Jones Award for Best Work of Fiction and was a Kirkus Reviews and San Francisco Chronicle Best Book of 2015 and a Best Texas Book of the Decade by Texas Observer. It was published in German by C.H. Beck and adapted for radio by NDR, and in Spanish translation made by himself by Penguin Random House. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in the New York Times, Salon, Texas Monthly, and elsewhere. Born and raised in Toluca, Mexico, he moved to the US at the age of 31 and began to write in English at 35, which is no small feat. He earned his MFA from UT Austin's New Writers Project and was a Knight Journalism Fellow at Stanford University. He's also been awarded fellowships from the Dobie Paisano Fellowship Program, Yaddo, Breadloaf Writers Conference, and Sewanee Writers Conference. And now I will leave it to Oscar and Antonio. Where did Antonio go?
I see.
Oh, there he is. Sorry. Okay.
No worry. Thanks, David.
Thank you, David, for that lovely introduction. And thank you for Alexandra and for thinking of me for this. I had a lovely time when we were in San Antonio. I guess that was, when was that? May, June, something like that.
I think it was very end of August.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was thrilled when I was asked to do this, and I'm going to start with a very quick story of when I met Antonio. Every January that I've been at UT, one of the things that I'm tasked with, and so are the other professors, is to go through piles and piles of admissions files, and it, now we're getting upwards of 300 applicants. But even when we were still an MA program in I think 2009, 2010, 11, we started switching over to an MFA program. There were still a ton of applicants. There were, I think at the time, probably about 70 or so applicants that coming in, and we were going through each one. And it's mind-numbing, going through one application after another application, after you're just reading stories and you're reading personal statements. And there's some good stuff, but most of the stuff is just sort of, And I compare it to going thrift shopping, where you're just going, you're going through the rack, you're going one thing, and you're just kind of tossing things aside. And then you sort of look at something and you go, Versace, And that's what Antonio was. That's what, when I saw his writing sample, I said, we're going to do everything we can to get this guy, if somebody hasn't already snapped him up. And so, I called him up and we had a nice conversation, and I started trying to lure him to our program. And so it was wonderful to see him go through the program. Fantastic to see his first book come out, and all the success it had as it debuted, and even now as it continues to have such a lasting impression on and I think it goes way beyond Texas. So thank you, and I look forward to this conversation, Antonio. You might not, but I am. And Antonio said I could ask anything. He was like, he would take any, and I thought, really? Boxers or briefs? I could ask anything. And I won't ask anything. I'll try to keep this focused and moving along. But here's my first question, Antonio, that I'd like to talk about. I think I want to say sometime, and it probably was happening before this, but I started hearing about it in the 90s, where somebody would come out with a collection of stories, and they immediately wanted to figure out a way to turn that collection into a novel, right? And mainly this was not because it was a novel, but because they figured it would sell better as a novel. Novels tend to just move quicker than story collections. And though I've always thought of this as a collection of stories, and I I hadn't read it in a few years. Going back through it, I could not help but think of it as a novel. And I wonder where your head is at with that. Did you think of them as individual stories, or did you think of it as sort of a novel? Not even in pieces. I mean, they talk about the sort of the novel in the sort of collected stories that sort of comprise a novel. One of the, I guess, more recent examples would be A Visit from the Goon Squad. This feels very connected. How do you see it now, Antonio?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. I'm very flattered and really surprised that you guys don't have anything more interesting to do on a Friday night. I'm a little bit concerned about all of you, but thanks anyway for being here. Thanks to David, Alexandra, and Blake for having us. It's a real pleasure, and thanks, Oscar, for being here with me tonight and for calling me the Versace of the literary fiction. I think that's an honor that I hadn't been granted yet, so I'm pretty pleased about that.
You can put that on your resume. That can be my next blurb for you. Don't ask for the blurb. Just put the Versace on
exactly.
there.
That's gonna be my Twitter bio from now on. Going back to your question, it's very funny because I didn't think about writing a novel. As you know, most of the stories in the collection I wrote the MFA during my time at UT. The book has 6 stories. Has 8 stories. 6 out of those I wrote during the program. So at the beginning, I was just like trying to have short stories ready for a workshop.
Yeah.
And I wrote, I think when I was 3, not the first 3 in the book, but 3 out of these 8 stories, I realized that there were characters that were present in all 3. And then there was like this missing father figure, kind of like becoming the center of this universe. And I realized that all these characters from these stories were part of the same family, and they were going through this trauma of being the patriarch of the family disappear. And I thought it would be really interesting to find out in what other ways this event had affected other members of the family or people around them. And I just thought it would be fun to kind of like explore that. And then the stories of these family members kept coming to me. And then I put the book together. I sold it, and then it was funny because when the book was, I don't know, 2 months from being published, like the book cover was ready and everything. I guess this was a call from the marketing department at the publishing house. Like one day, my editor sent me an email like, "Hey, we have an idea, but feel free to say no," which was kind of like code switch for "this is not my idea, so please reject it." What about if we build the book as a novel in stories? Because it's basically like this one narrative about one family.
Yeah.
And obviously the idea behind, as you said, is it's going to sell more if you build it as a novel, right? And obviously as a debut author, you feel this pressure to almost say yes to everything. One, because you still can't believe that you're going to publish a book, that somebody's interested in selling your book. In my case, I think I have like a double layer of that experience because I'm writing in my second language. So just the fact that somebody's interested in what I'm writing in a language that I still have trouble mastering or controlling totally, it's just unbelievable to me. So kind of like saying no to stuff, it's difficult because you're like, how, and also Mexicans, so we Mexicans always want to say yes to everything, you know? It's very hard to say no. So it's like, how am I going to say no to this idea? They want to say more, but I didn't feel comfortable with it. And it all came down to my thinking, I didn't write a novel. I was not thinking about writing a novel. To me, it was a matter of principle.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a collection of stories that are interconnected, you know, that have this a very specific structure, in my view, that for some people is very evident, or for some readers is very evident, for others is not. And I said, no, I don't want to sell it as a novel. And they were okay with it. But then it was funny because when it was translated to Spanish, or when I translated it to Spanish and it was sold in Mexico, they sold it as a novel. In Germany, they sold it as a novel. Like, people talk about the book as a novel. And I'm like, okay, to me, if you want to see it as a novel, that's okay. You know, that I'm okay with it. To me, it's a short story collection. And at the same time, if I may agree with you about this difficult path that short stories have to kind of like open a space for them in the world, I've always thought that if you see a story collection being published, and not because mine is a collection, the chances that it's going to be a really good book are very high versus a novel, because in the mind of publishers and agents and editors in New York, a collection needs to be outstanding to be acceptable. And basically what everybody's thinking is, okay, this author might be able to write a novel later on. So let's sign him or her first, and then let's see if they can write a novel later on.
And maybe they'll never write a story again.
Yeah.
If we're lucky. He'll never bring us a collection again. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, he'll get it out of his system.
Exactly. Yeah. And also they see it as an MFA-ish thing, you know?
Yeah.
It's easier to write short stories in an MFA program just because the genre lets itself more easily to the workshop setting, which is true, you know? But I would argue that, I mean, writing a novel is incredibly hard, but writing a story collection is incredibly hard as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, part of what I was noticing was that, you know, the stories, they all stand alone, but the meaning seems to deepen when you see them collectively. Right. I mean, it's not that they can't stand alone, but when you begin to sort of, and just having gone through them in the last few days, you know, sort of fusing this family as a unit that was splintered in all different directions. It was incredibly moving. So at what point did you've got these stories? At what point did you begin to see it as a book, not just, you know, these stories all sort of, you're trying to corral them?
Mm-hmm. I think I was lucky that out of those three first stories that I mentioned early on, one was the one that right now is like the opening of the book. Mm-hmm. Another one was the last story in the book. So I kind of like had the main structure for like a book length project. You know, like my hope was that throughout the collection, even though each story is separate and it's a standalone piece, there's a sort of like narrative arc or journey, if you will, throughout the experience of this family. And I figured out that, as you realize at the beginning of the book, that all of these stories have been triggered by the disappearance of the patriarch, you start wondering about his fate, like what happened to him, why did he disappear, how did he disappear, what happened to him in the end, etc., etc. And in the end, he's the only character who doesn't have like his own story, you know, because to me that was not important. What was important to me was the emotional impact of this disappearance on other people. But I felt that throughout the book, you could learn a little bit of what he was going through, and that the expectation of the reader would be to meet him at some point in the story, in the larger story. And I think the one of the scenes of the final scenes in one of these stories had that. So I figured out that it would be that I had kind of like the structure that I needed to make it a book. So in that sense, I felt that I could have written more stories, you know, like I don't know how many more about like different members of the family, but these were all the stories that came to me. Like the characters decided who wanted to tell their story and who didn't.
Yeah, it's interesting. You should mention the patriarch. I mean, one of the stories where I felt like I got the closest glimpse of him. I mean, obviously he hovers over the entire collection, but it was the Better Latitude. And of course, not the legal fam, not the real, the told from the mistress, right?
Yeah.
And it felt to me that a lot of those ways that we carry ourselves in families were not there for him in that relationship. That he was. He was the same man, but he carried himself in a different way. He didn't have to have the same stature that he must have with such a large family.
Yeah, I guess because the narrator in that story is not really part of that family, doesn't have like all these other preoccupations about status and having a name and everything. I think the narrator, sees him in a different way. Also, he also is a different person when he is with this other family, with his second family, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe he allows himself to be more vulnerable, if you will. And that's what, I agree with you. That's when you get to see a little bit of him.
He's a lot more unguarded.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you could have continued writing, and you may have just killed one of the questions that I had, which was, were there any stories that didn't make it into the collection that you'd written and they just didn't, for whatever reason, kind of mesh?
No, it's funny because after the book came out, like magazines and journals sometimes like reach out to you and like, hey, do you have something that you would like to publish? Do you have any short story for us? And I'm like, I don't have anything. These are the only 8 short stories.
That's it right here.
That's it. And honestly, I think about like the prospect of writing a short story right now. It's terrifying to me because
I know. I mean, when I showed up to graduate school, I showed up with the 2 stories that I applied for, and I had nothing else.
Same.
Nothing else. And it was terrifying because I knew people had shown up with boxes of stories, and they were just, polishing them up and submitting them.
Yeah.
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 Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that this might sound weird, but it's not me who decides what stories I write. Like, it's the characters that they decide to come, you know. And these were all the characters that I had. If I had like other images about other family members doing other stuff or going through other experiences, I would probably have explored those options as well, but I didn't. Only at the end of the book, there's a family tree where you can have access to kind of like other family members. And I thought it would be fun to offer that little glimpse of these other lives that were affected by this experience, and leave it up to the reader to imagine what happened to them, you know.
And tell me the thinking. I mean, it absolutely works for me, but tell me the thinking of placing it at the end and not at the beginning, like the Buendia family.
Yeah, that's funny, because again, when I hadn't even finished the book, I had finished my thesis, my MFA thesis that had like these 6 stories, and I started sending it to agents, and a couple of them rejected the book. And well, let me take one step back. When I put together my thesis, I had the family tree at the beginning of the book. And then when this feedback from a couple agents came back, I had the sense that the family tree gave them the wrong impression about the kind of like family saga.
Oh yeah.
Would encounter, you know, that it probably was more like a 100 Years of Solitude kind of thing, you know, where it's like a more linear narrative, where the connections between the different characters and the different family members are very specific. And in my view, the way the book is structured and kind of like tied together is more like a solar system, where the patriarch is at the center, and then all the stories gravitate around him. And some stories are very close to him, and others are very, very, very far away from him, but they still revolve around the center, right?
Yeah.
To me, if you read the book and you get it, you want, to me, the structure is very obvious, but I had the sense that putting the family tree at the beginning gave the wrong impression. So I decided to move it to the back, so it would be kind of like a nice afterthought, like a nice extra thing to have. And then it was funny because when in Germany, they decided to put the family tree at the beginning.
The Germans, those Germans.
Yeah. And from what I've been able to read in terms of like reviews using Google Translate, I think many readers in Germany found it very useful. You know, that it helped them kind of like feel not so lost about like these loose threads that are bringing together the different characters. So I don't know. I think that's okay.
Let me tell you my German story. So I'm in Germany, and I go out. I'm teaching there, but I go out in the morning, and I get to a crosswalk, and it's like 6:30 in the morning. And I get to the crosswalk, and this woman and this man come up, and they stand at the crosswalk right next to me. And I look down the street, and there's not a car in sight. And I look the other way, and there's not a car in sight. And I'm thinking, well, why aren't we walking across the street? And we're not walking across the street because they're waiting for the damn thing, the little man to come across. And they will not cross. They will not cross. They follow the rules. So that fits, I think, with at least my impression from being there a couple of times. One of the things that really intrigued me, I think, from the beginning, reading your work, but but again, going back through it, and I think this is part of the beauty of the book and the real charm of it, and the feeling of that you're getting something special, and that's that things are not over explained. You know, I mean, this is based largely on a crisis that has been going on in Mexico for years, you know, and it's affected every level of the country, and it's in there, and it's not that you don't know what's happening, but I think it handles it in such a intimate manner that, you know, you get it at the sort of the gut level. You don't get it in this societal way, right?
Mhm.
And I just found that to be, you know, I think a lot of times when you're writing about a place that, you know, people are not familiar with, the you know, there's a I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm speaking for myself. This feeling that you somehow have to explain things to them, that you almost have to be a tour guide of sorts, and you have to sort of restrain yourself from doing that, you know, because that's a different kind of book. That's not this book. This is not a book that, I mean, it would inform you if you're studying that. It would give you a little bit. It would give you a lot more sort of the you know, the way the crisis has you know, affected, as I said, all you know, different variations of socioeconomic groups, but it's not interested in explaining it. It's not interested in getting into you know, the you know, everything else that's going on, the nautical business or anything of that nature, or how the, you know, one administration has dealt with it or another, and how it has accelerated over time and peaked, and so was that difficult for you to not include that, or was that a conscious decision?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's funny that you asked me that question, because I don't know if you remember, it probably was around the first year in the program. One day you and I were talking, and probably we're talking about one of my stories or something. And you told me that talking about like your own work being set in a very specific place like Brownsville, like you felt that you couldn't, or you didn't want to be a tour guide, that you shouldn't be a tour guide for the people who are not familiar with the place you're writing about, that the place needs to just to be there, and the stories need to feel natural and organic to the place. And if you start explaining the place, then you become a tour guide for the place, and that's not the role of the writer. And that really stayed with me and really helped me kind of like navigate this experience of writing in English for, at least at the beginning, a primarily American audience, about a place that they don't know, and also about socioeconomic community of which very little is known in the US, which is upper class Mexicans, right? So, so I felt I kind of like took that advice to heart and decided to kind of have like this first person point of view through everything that I was writing. And it's something that I'm still doing, even with other writing. I don't explain what's going on. If you need an explanation, then you can go and get it somewhere else. And I would get some feedback or some questions about that. Like, for example, what happened to the father? What really happened? Why was he kidnapped? Was he kidnapped? Did he die at the end? When he comes back, at the end of the book. Is he alive? Is he a ghost? It's like, it's not my job to tell you that. That's a story. You figure it out on your own. And to me, it's just more interesting to write about these places and make them as authentic as possible without having to explain them, you know? Also because I think when we are talking about like non-mainstream narratives, we feel that we have to explain everything just because most people are not familiar with our experience. But when you read mainstream narratives, when you read Jonathan Franzen or John Didion even, they don't explain the place. Like their stories are just there, and they don't have to explain to you what the white experience is or what California is, you know? So I think sometimes you feel that kind of like the need to explain yourself, but you just resist it, as my children would say. You just resist.
Yeah. Well, and I think and you know, that was some brilliant advice that you got, by the way. But
I use it in my classes. I absolutely.
So I should be receiving some sort of royalty for that.
Damn.
That is overdue. But no, I think that there is and I hadn't thought about this necessarily in my own with my own work, but I'm seeing it in yours, and that's a pretty common thing that, you know, you see it in somebody else's that's, you know, that's hard to recognize. But there's a immersive quality to that. You know, I would describe it when I talk to people that it was something akin to and I would do this on occasion of taking a friend. I was living in Austin, and taking a friend who'd never been to the border down to Brownsville, and not explain very much, if anything. Just get them there. Just let them soak it up and try to make sense of it. Even or maybe even particularly if they don't know Spanish, and just be there and just look and see and hear and smell and just take it in that way, as opposed to someone sort of framing it for you. And so I can imagine that, you know, because there's a way that, you know, if you're talking about a community that's outside of of that mainstream, you know, I mean, in a good many instances, it's going to come with sort of expectations, right? And so the expectation is, you're talking about Mexicans. Well, you know, these aren't the Mexicans we're seeing on you know, in the camps and stuff. This is not that, right? And so, but the education is an immersive one. It's the blast that you get from that first narrator going through that life that you know is just being laid out for us. That's just amazing. You're just, I mean, it's just like, if you're not getting it from that, you're half asleep or you're completely asleep, because it's just jumping off the page, right?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, in as a reader, those are the books that I enjoy the most. Like I enjoy just like having access to worlds and experiences that I'm not familiar with. But I don't want them to be explained to me. I just want to experience them as they are, and that's what fiction does, right? Like it brings you to these places so you can see everything. And also with the book, I knew that if the book was ever going to be published in Spanish, I would translate it, even if I didn't know if it was going to be a good translation or not, I didn't care. It was my book, and it would have been very weird to me to read my own work in my mother language translated by somebody else, you know? So I knew that in Spanish, it would be read as a book about this experience written by somebody who went through that experience. So the book needed to me, it needed to feel authentic for readers living in these places. So I wanted for readers in Mexico City to go through this book and say, yeah, it feels authentic. This is Mexico City. This is the Mexico City that I know. To me, that was super, super important.
So was there material that was in the translation that wasn't in the English version?
No, that was another thing that when I started doing translation, I decided that I would respect the original. I wouldn't add anything to the book. But when I started translating the book, I realized how much the narrative in the original is driven by the English language. And it's funny because I'm writing in my second language, but I think I was so obsessed, so preoccupied with being clear, you know, that there's a lot of like wordplay and a lot of images that are just like, were just like naturally born in the English language that were really impossible to translate to Spanish. So I had to come up with a different image that would convey the same emotional message, you know, or experience, but in Spanish.
So you know, and I talk to people about this all the time, and this sounds like a perfect example of it. That oftentimes the translation is not so much a translation as an adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly in this case, where a lot of those idioms are just not going to translate. It's just gonna sound weird. Particularly if the narrative is so immersive. I mean, it'd be different if you know, these were immigrant stories where the immigrants were having you know, a tremendous amount of interaction with native, you know, people, you know, citizens, and they do have to some degree, but you know, those are you know, not that frequent. So, and I'm really curious about this because because I think we came to this topic or this issue in writing from you know, different perspectives. Mine being that, you know, Spanish is both a you know, it's a language that I grew up around, but it was not my native language, right? And so I know it from the immersive experience of growing up on the border. So in almost every instance, and I mean, I'm there, it is rare when I am writing what my characters are saying, my characters are whispering to me in Spanish. And it's only when it gets, you know, there's something going on in here, so that when it comes out, it actually comes out, it's some software or something, it comes out in English, right? Mm-hmm. But it sounds like you're purposely, at least for this book, for this project, thinking in English, if that's the proper way of framing it.
Yeah, it's funny because absolutely, but I didn't think I was when I was working on the book. I thought that all the characters were in the background talking to me in Spanish, that I was hearing them in Spanish, you know? Because when I started working on the translation, I thought this is going to be super easy. Like, this is my native language. Like, I know these people. These are Chilangos, meaning like Mexicans from Mexico City. I know how they speak. This is going to be easy. In a month, done. It took me 4 months, and it was a nightmare. And I think if it was up to me, I would never do it again. But my wife has threatened me that if I don't translate my next book, that she would divorce me or something. But definitely, I think, it has a lot to do with how comfortable you feel with the language. And now I can tell you more comfortably that every piece of writing is a translation from the world, from reality. Like, even when you're writing in your first language, you are translating the world, right? What you experience, what you see around yourself, what you smell, what you go through, you are translating it into a language.
Describing it to some degree, you're right, yeah.
Exactly. But because I was struggling with the language, I needed to be very, very focused on the other parts of the craft that I could have control over. Characterization, voice, scene, setting, etc., etc. Because I didn't feel as comfortable with the language. So I guess I felt that if I allowed myself to hear these characters speaking Spanish to me, it would be harder to translate than to English. So I had to kind of like even recreate the Chilango Spanish, if you will, into an English language that would convey the same sort of traits, the same sense of privilege and entitlement and confusion and loss and insecurity that these characters were experiencing, but in English, you know.
So when you go back to Spanish with the translation and you know, you're off the chain, you're off the English chain. Do you find that the characters become you know, I mean, more dynamic, more because you're not hampered by that? I mean, are they more expressive in what they're saying? No.
No, and here's the thing, that I left Mexico in 2001, and I moved to the US in 2004, and I've been writing in English since 2008. So it's funny how difficult as it is, now I feel more comfortable writing in English than in Spanish. But at the same time, I fell in love with the English language because it's so elastic, it's so malleable. Spanish is like any other Latin language. It's much more, it's stiffer, if you want. Like, you need more words. If language is a Lego, right? You need more blocks to build a house. In English, if you think really, 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 really hard, you can come up with a wonderful image with 2 words.
Mm-hmm.
That's almost impossible to achieve in Spanish.
Yeah.
And to me, the way a lot of words are kind of like structured in English, it's like if you bring two words that mean something different when they are apart, and you bring them together and it's a new word and it means something different. To me, that's wonderful. I love that, because I can break those words apart and kind of like play with them. And one of the reasons that I've always enjoyed writing, regardless of language, is just for the opportunity to play with language, to play with words. And I guess after playing with the Spanish language for many years, I discovered this new language, this new Lego set, and I fell in love with it, you know? Mm-hmm. And it might be more difficult to me to create nice houses and structures in this language, but I enjoy it more. And I don't even know why I'm saying this. I don't even remember what was your question. But
Yeah, I asked you what size Versace you wore. But had you thought that I mean early on that you would write in Spanish?
oh yeah, absolutely.
Did you write in Spanish? I know you wrote journalism, but fiction. Had you written fiction in Spanish?
When I in 2008, I got a fellowship, a journalism fellowship to go to Stanford for a year. And up until then, I had been working on a novel in Spanish for 9 years. And I thought I had finished it. And when I did, I started submitting it to agents and editors and prizes in Mexico and Spain, and nothing happened. Like not even rejection letters, nothing, zero. It was as if I was submitting to a black hole. So I said, okay, I need to improve. Obviously, my writing sucks. So when I got to Stanford, I decided that I would take as many creative writing classes as possible to improve my writing. But they didn't have any creative writing classes in Spanish. If they had them, I would probably have taken them, but they didn't have any. So I said, okay, I'll just take these classes, and obviously they will help me because the craft is the craft, regardless of language, right? So never in my wildest dreams, when I was at Stanford or when I started there, would I imagine that I would end up just like writing in English and publishing a book in English. It was completely unthinkable to me.
But I'm really curious about this, and there seems to be a link in that, in it not being your native tongue, of the apprehension that you had with it, and you know, I don't think anyone's reading your work and thinking, you know, there's something wrong here. It's not. I mean, it's completely clear, but you know, I would imagine that your attention to the language would be that much higher because of where you're coming into it from, right? In a way that I don't know, it might not have been there in Spanish because it was so comfortable and so easy for you.
Yeah, I think I felt so comfortable writing in Spanish. That was the one of the many issues that my writing had when I was writing in Spanish, that I felt so comfortable with the language that I would just like get drunk on the writing itself and just play with the words, even if the words in the end didn't mean anything, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, you need to write beautiful sentences, but they need to mean something. You need to tell a story, not just writing nice stuff, you know? And I think writing in English gave me along with the opportunity of learning more about the craft, because it is true that I hadn't taken any creative writing classes, before Stanford. Like I had only taken classes as a journalist. It helped a lot. So I think that conjunction between like having to pay attention to the other elements of craft, because I didn't have as much control over the language as I had in Spanish, along with learning more specifically about the craft, gave me the opportunity to use this new language more with more intent, if you will.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. How are we doing on time? I know we're coming up on an hour, and were there questions that were coming in that you fielded? Alexandra?
Well, we have Blake. Do you have any last questions to ask Oscar, or we can also just turn it over to, we had some pre-submitted questions, right, Blake? And there's some questions coming into the chat.
Yeah, so do we have, I know that you put in some questions in the Google Doc. Do you have that open? Maybe we can start there. And then if you have questions, it was kind of amazing as questions would come in, you would kind of organically answer them, even as ones like, especially in the translation section, which was just, it was just fascinating because kind of, you know, like you, Antonio, I was thinking, oh, he probably could translate his own book in like a month, but that whole discussion about going from, I mean, you know, English back to Spanish was really fascinating, you know, the whole story. So it's just amazing to see like the inside scoop, both between the relationship that the two of you have going back to graduate school, but just seeing how the work is made and the process, and how important it is to have a mentor and to have a relationship with someone who you can talk about your work with. I mean, that really is imperative. So I love kind of getting to sit in, and it's almost like sitting in on the most intimate conversation when two people are kind of talking about their history as writers and how the work is kind of made and then eventually published. So, but we can get that Google Doc. Do you have that, Alexandra?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in for one thing, and then I have started to put some questions that were pre-submitted into the chat. We can start with those, and then any of you with us tonight, feel free to put questions in the chat. I'm sure Antonio would be more than happy to answer them. And but I just wanted to chime in. So I lived in Spain for 6 years. My husband and I did a bilingual magazine, and we had the most fascinating adventures with translation. And I loved, Oscar, your comparison, because we said, oh, it's almost like a cover song. You know what I mean? Like a translation of someone, like you're doing a cover of the original. You can never really, you know, obviously repeat the original. But I just found it really interesting how you had to drill down into the craft more, and that combination of using a new language kind of, it's something that really helped you. That was just fascinating to learn about, Antonio.
Yeah, it's funny. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Oscar. Yeah, it's funny how to me, a language is a very specific way to see the world and to experience the world. And it was funny because when I was in the program at the MFA, I had to read some Borges stories for some classes. And when I was in college, I read Borges for a few classes, and I didn't like Borges back then. And then I had to read or reread some of Borges' stories at UT in English. Obviously, I had to read them in English so I would be able to be part of the discussion in class, and so people knew what I was talking about. And I loved it. I loved his work in translation. So I thought, how weird it is, right? And so it's the same, kind of like the same story, the same word, but once it's translated to a different language, it takes on a different life, right? And it's funny how it makes me think about, for example, Bolaño, how successful his work has been here, how well received. And when you read Bolaño in English, it's beautiful. I love it. I love Bolaño in Spanish as well, but it's a completely different experience, right?
That's I noticed even with my experiences learning Spanish in Madrid, when I became more conversationally fluent, I could tell, like, I kind of I would feel different speaking Spanish than when you speak English. And the gestures the Madrileños had are so specific that brings, we could have a whole conversation on gestures, right? But so I just think a lot of interesting material coming out of that part of your conversation. It was just fascinating. But I'd love to hear, I think we have some questions coming in. Alston, you submitted a question. Do you want to unmute and ask it yourself?
I think I've been unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, just, given the impact that COVID has had on all of us, I'm just wondering, Antonio, if in your current work since COVID, if you're incorporating any of that in your writing. I guess the reason I'm asking is, is just from a very basic level, like, watching, television or whatever, you see commercials where COVID is totally ignored. It seems like they're just totally out to lunch and, it's not relevant. And yet, hopefully this is a very, it's a temporary thing. And, 2 or 3 years from now, we'll forget it, maybe. So I'm just wondering, and I've ask other writers the same question during this time. But I'm just curious about yourself and the work that you've been doing.
Mhm. It takes me a while to kind of like process the trauma, if you will. Like the book I'm still working on takes place in 1999. So it took me a while to kind of like process experiences that took place in Mexico in the late 90s. It's funny because I started taking some notes about some things that happened during quarantine this year that I might work around. But it takes me a while to process them, and to try to kind of like boil them down to the emotional level and not kind of like the headline level, if you will. But going back to what you were saying, that hopefully in 3 years, 2 or 3 years, we'll forget about it. I think we all want to get past this, but I think this is an experience that we will be experiencing in storytelling for a long time. This is like some sort of like 9/11, Vietnam, World War II kind of event, like a once in a lifetime event. And I'm pretty sure that we will have access to a wide array of movies and novels and stories, from really shitty ones to really great ones. And if you think about like World War II, we're still reading about it, right? I think we will be reading about World War II for a long time. Same the Vietnam War. I think it took us a while to really start getting profound stories around 9/11, and we are still having some of those. So I think we will be working with this material, if you want, for a long time.
Thank you. I think just to let the other authors I've asked the same question of is, I think in their own way, they've sort of said something similar. It's not immediate. And like you said, it takes a long time to process it. And I agree that maybe 10 years from now, 20, they'll still be talking about this pandemic.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
I was teaching a class this summer, and you never know what you're going to get in a creative writing class. And some student handed in a short story, and it was these people walking into a convenience store, and the guy had a mask on. And this was July, August, whatever it was, and I was still thinking that they've come in to rob the place. And then and then it took me. It's like I read it a couple times. It's like, oh. Because nothing particularly happened, there was nothing mentioned about COVID or any, there was no space issue. And they, they're sort of trying to figure out what they're going to write about. And they wrote about what they probably, saw the night before. But yeah, I think the idea of, space and how we, how we're in the same room with other people, and, just this, it's not so much the literal or exact experience of the pandemic or the quarantine, but all the other ways that it's sort of had an impact that we're not even fully conscious of. I think, the idea that you're walking down the street and it's perfectly fine to cross the street if you see somebody on the sidewalk walking toward you. And I ask myself, when will that not be okay, or will it always be okay now? Because we did it for whatever, a year. Will it, that used to be rude, and now it's probably smart to do it, right?
Yeah. Antonio, I have a question. It's a multi-part question. You can answer one of the parts, none of the parts, or all of the parts. It's all up to you. Okay, you ready?
Already.
Okay. For many of the characters in Barefoot Dogs, their stories read like elegies to a better time and place. When you were writing each individual story, were you also thinking about better times and places yourself? Or was this theme, say, of nostalgia, which certainly seems a vital part of many an immigrant story, how could it not be but a part of it? And I say that just because I was thinking of my grandmother who constantly talked about Vienna, and so Vienna became a part of my life as well, weirdly. So how could it not be inherent within the characters themselves? Did the idea of looking back arise from where the character had once been, a literal distance, or was it more a product of the writer distancing himself from the narrative, or maybe a little of both? Sorry, I don't know if you want to answer any of that. You don't have to.
No. It makes total sense. Yeah. I think there was a little bit of that. In my everyday life, I'm not a nostalgic person. I'm always kind of like, I'm like forward looking and forward thinking. I always think that the future is the best time. And but I think like subconsciously I'm probably like very nostalgic because nostalgia makes me cringe when I see it in other people. So that probably means that I'm very nostalgic at heart. At the same time, Mexico has changed so much that to me it's like the country I came from, the country where I lived and where I grew up doesn't exist anymore. So it's impossible to go back to the place. And that creates a very different nostalgia than when you just like move to another city. Like I lived 3 years in Madrid. My wife's from Spain, and we go to Spain every summer, except this summer for obvious reasons. And I love Spain. I miss it a lot. If I could move to another place, I would move back to Madrid, not to Mexico. I don't miss Mexico, but partly I guess because that Mexico that I lived doesn't exist anymore. And the characters in the book are really fresh off the boat, if you will, in a metaphorical sense. They are just about to experience the trauma of exile, because it's not like a migration that you want to do because you're looking for these are privileged people, so they're like, oh, New York is great, let's move there. No, it's like we have to get out of here because otherwise our safety is in question. So that creates a sense of exile that creates a very different nostalgia from a place, that place where you cannot come back to, like it's forbidden. And it's also the place where these characters were somebody, they were important, and when they move, they lose all that privilege. And to me, that's such a fascinating experience, how people who you think of people who have means that they don't, that they can't lose things, they can lose, and these characters lose so much because they lose status, they lose their own identity, who they were in this other place they cannot go back to. To me, that was fascinating. And I think if the stories are kind of like think by nostalgia, is that kind of nostalgia about the place that you cannot go back to, but for very specific reasons.
Well, that it also seemed to me to make the characters ill. You were playing with, maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed to me that you were playing with some kind of like metaphorical and physical illness, maybe homesickness in a weird way, but I felt like there was a sickness hovering over all of these characters, like at all times. Maybe that's an obvious sort of thing to say about your stories, but I loved Martine. He was such a grumpy, grumpusy, but you felt so much sympathy from him, especially at the end, you know. I actually cried. Like it actually made, like that story actually made me cry, which most short stories don't, you know. But yeah,
Thank you.
that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, the idea of making relatable and sympathetic characters that can be insufferable, you know. And many of the characters in the
Yeah.
book are pretty insufferable people.
Yep.
And I
But you love them. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the challenge of making them kind of like human, you know, and vulnerable.
You did a great job. Totally. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's another question for you, Antonio, in the chat. Aurelio, are you here? Do you
Yeah.
want to unmute yourself and ask it yourself?
Yeah, Antonio, what motivates you and what drives you to tell these particular stories?
Oof.
Oof.
That's such a big question. I don't know. I think being a writer is kind of like a condition.
A painful one, yeah.
Yeah. I don't really know.
Well, what comes to mind with the question is why is it like you say, are there a lot of stuff floating around, or you really don't know, or?
I don't know if this is going to answer the question, but I'm going to try to tell you.
No, I like to get into the mind of the writer, you know, whatever comes out, you know, just.
Yeah. I think when I was a kid, I grew up in Mexico, obviously, in a place where one side of our family had a lot of money and a lot of power, political and otherwise, and the other side of my family have very little. They would struggle to make ends meet. Working class people, low-paid teachers and bureaucrats. And I was navigating these two worlds all the time, like going back and forth all the time. And when I remember myself growing up in Mexico, I see myself in a perpetual state of confusion, you know, like struggling to understand why these people were part of the same family had such starkly different experiences, right? And why Mexico was the place that it is. It's a fascinating country that it's utterly sophisticated in some ways and incredibly violent and primitive in other ways. And that's what makes it so fascinating to me, beyond the fact that I'm from there, right? So I guess one reason many of us are writers is just to try to understand what we're going through, to process these experiences, you know? So when you ask me what motivates me to tell stories, the first thing is I love writing. It's fun, you know? It's painful and it's horrendously difficult, but to me, it's a lot of fun. Like just to get yourself lost in this imaginary world and create these images and sentences. To me, it's the place where I want to be all the time, even if it's difficult. So I would write anything.
Is it cathartic? In other words, because my father was from Cerrado, Nuevo León, so I have some of those family things. But are there some wounds that are healed in any way? Is it cathartic, or it's just are creative? You know, these stories.
Not really.
Okay.
It's funny how it's cathartic, kind of like after you read it and when you, you know, because,
Yeah,
but not. It's funny because to me, I know that the material is working when it's emotionally exhausting to write, you know? So, but I don't see it as cathartic. I don't kind of like deal with my own issues when I'm writing. I don't use it as therapy. I think it's a terrible way of therapy. It's very, very, very expensive and effective as a therapy, you know?
Well, there's a whole field of journaling that would contradict that to say writing about it helps relieve some of the pain. I don't believe that either, but you know, there's that theory.
Well, that other kind of writing,
Yeah.
I can agree that it can be therapeutic, but when
But
you're
yours is
trying
not
to-
that. Yours is not that.
Yeah, when you're trying to write something literary, I don't see it. I think I would even argue that it can be therapeutic because you would spoil it, you know. So it's not therapeutic, but I guess it's the way that I have to process the world, to understand the world, and to reflect the world back to the world. But I don't think I'm very unique in that sense. I think many writers do that, you know. What do you think, Oscar?
Some writers have been, it's noted that they might be dealing with their demons in their writing, and that gives it a certain energy. I don't know if it's true, but it's obviously not true with you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, I spent so much of my time once I left Brownsville just feeling that, you know, there was a part of me that almost wasn't allowed to sort of come with me. That there was a part of me that I had to sort of check at the door. That the entirety of me was not always welcome in different spaces. And, you know, for me, it was about, you know, the whole of me being present. And these stories, yeah, I wouldn't go to the, you know, calling them therapy. You know, there's something that, you know, I mean, yeah, after the fact, you sort of understand sort of what you were working toward and why that that image or whatever the story may be based on, whatever the seed of it might have been, why it stayed with you for 20 years, 30 years. Why have you not been able to let that go? And it's only through going through that process that you begin to discover what it was. I mean, that alone may send you into therapy, but but it won't cure you, you know? It's like, oh my God, that's what it was. That's what it was. All this time I didn't know.
Well, growing up on the border is a certain cross we have to bear sometimes. But I want to ask you, I've been wanting to meet you for ages. Was there ever a little old lady with a bowling ball in a grocery store? Did something like that ever happen? I just love those stories. El Chango.
Yeah, no, that one, no.
You created it, right?
The store did happen. A lot of the things did happen. That the story was based on my tia Nena, who was a world-class bowler. She was. I went to. She died when I was in graduate school, and I came down for the funeral, and their house, the inside of the house was just covered with trophies. I mean, like they'd go to Vegas and they'd go to Canada, and they'd come back with these huge trophies. And so, anyway, they're having they have the funeral, and then I go and I ask my dealer, is there anything I can do to help you? Because he feels he looks like he's kind of out of it for obvious reasons. And he says, well, there's people coming over to the house later. Do you mind mowing the yard? And it's a little yard. So yeah, I'll mow it. He said, well, the machine is out there in the back, the lawnmower. He said, the machine is, la máquina is back there.
Máquina, yeah.
So I go back there and I open the little shed, and there's more trophies. I mean, there's trophies like all the way to the back of the thing. And it was like, this was the annex for the trophies. And then I just thought, then this has to be.
That was great.
Yeah.
Those short stories are still mine. Antonio, I haven't read your book yet. I just ordered it on Amazon. So, you know, tengo que ver lo tuyo.
You're good. No, Brownsville is a wonderful story collection. Chango is one of my all-time favorite stories. It's amazing.
But that store, I think it's your last story in the series, no? That's the one? It really just stayed with me because it reminds me of ladies in Laredo that were like that, you know, my mother and other people, you know, so. You captured Brownsville in the way that I would like to capture Laredo, although I'm not a good writer, but
Yeah, I think I haven't read his work. I've read some work early on, but the writer I think is you might want to look up is Ito Romo
Mm.
or
He lives in San Antonio.
yeah, and Norma Cantu.
Yeah, I just talked to Norma last week. Oh yeah, no, the one that I was curious about, although one shot, the other Brownsville writer, the King del Reyes, the son of the, it's based on the Canción del Rey, but the title of the book.
The Boy Kings of Texas.
Ese, you know,
Yeah.
Mixed bag, but also I can't remember the image that I stayed with is throwing the masa on the roof so you don't have to put it on the tamales. You know, there's images like that if you grow up around there, it just stays with you, you know?
Yeah.
It just stays with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
I think I was just gonna ask one little question and then we'll wrap up. Is that okay?
Already. I got on late.
Yeah. But it's kind of chiming off of what you've been talking about, Aurelio and Oscar and Antonio. So I know, so having your first collection be short stories, Antonio, like after writing that collection, like what are you writing now? Like did writing those short stories kind of make you want to write a novel or make you want to write an essay? I mean, like from the craft or just writing journey point of view, what did you take away as a writer after that first book, and what's kind of compelling you to write now? You know, what forms or?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's called Second Book Hell. I've been working on a novel for I think 8 years now. And it's funny because I think when I started, the characters from the collection were still pretty much living in my head. So I didn't really have any characters to work with. But I knew that I needed to start working on a novel, right? Because that's what everybody is expecting. Your agent, the editor, et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't have other short stories. I was not really interested in keep writing short stories. I wanted to write a novel, but I didn't have a novel in me, as they say, right? So I made one up, and I was working on a made up story for, I don't know, 2-3 years, really struggling with it. And then the book came out, and it was funny because I was, imagine, but 6 years ago, a similar setting as this one, with people telling you, oh, your book's so wonderful, I love it, blah, 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 and the reviews coming in. And I was just so struggling with the novel and feeling like I'll never be able to write something like this again. Like, I don't know how I did it. It was like just a stroke of luck. I suck as a writer. These stories going nowhere, etc., etc. So my agent and I tried to sell the novel to my editor at the time, and the moment she read a few pages, and then we met, and the moment she started asking questions, I knew that the piece was completely dead, because those were the same questions that I was asking myself, but I was afraid to answer, which was that the story was going nowhere. The characters were dead, were made up. It sounds weird because we're talking about fiction, right? But to me, the characters need to come to me, like they're real characters. They live somewhere else and they come to me and they tell me their story. And all I have to do is to report on their lives. That's what I do. That's my job as a writer. So I just stopped writing, saying, I can't. And I realized that I started working on that novel for the wrong reasons, because I started writing for an agent and for an editor and for the New York Times Review and yada, 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 yada. So I stopped, and I just let these characters from the story collection leave, And then little by little, other characters started coming back to me. And I've been working on that ever since. It's a very different novel or story from the collection. But I like the idea of these long narratives, these intricate, long stories. And that's what I've been working on ever since. I also write like personal essays, which I enjoy writing too. But that's what I'm working on for now.
That's a fascinating description. Yeah, no, I love the
Very
idea.
long description, very long answer to your.
No,
Where-
no, it's great.
Where is your present work geographically located? What's the site of the piece you're working on that you feel good about?
It's mostly set in Mexico City in the late 90s. Some of the story takes place in Juarez, and some of it takes place in Spain.
Mhm.
Did any of you see Roma, the film?
Yes.
Do you think it captured Mexico City of that period well? I think so. I'd never seen the halcones in a film, and I'd heard about them, so that's why I was curious.
Yeah, that was nice. Yeah, I think it was beautifully photographed.
But el cuento no.
I mean, it's like,
It's interesting. No, I was just thinking because of setting and stuff. So you
I
grew up,
think-
yeah, that's Chilango. You grew up in Mexico City.
I was born in Toluca,
Oh, in Toluca.
and unfortunately, and moved to Mexico City when I was 18.
Okay.
And I think I am Chilango by adoption.
Yeah.
You know?
I had two cousins that were stereotypic niños mimados.
Niños fresas.
This has been wonderful. I'm sorry it's going to end. And Oscar, I've been wanting to meet you for years. This is really good. This is really good.
Thank you. It's good to meet you too. And thank you, Antonio, for your openness, your generosity with your comments, allowing people to go inside your head and sort of look around and ask you all kinds of personal, artistic questions, and your willingness to go there.
No, this is my pleasure. It's
By the way,
amazing.
there's another
Yeah.
question that we don't have time for. Oscar, when you went from your short stories to your novel, what traumatic was that? Was it in any way like Antonio's, or was it a very different experience?
The experience, the hell, you only go to another level of hell each time. Yeah, no, it was very traumatic, and I think in part because the stories, you deal with one, you feel you have a sense of it, and then you put it aside and you go to the next one, and hopefully they hold together, but there's not that expectation with the novel from the very from the very beginning. You're understanding that this is going to be part of a cohesive unit.
Yeah.
And so the expectations are, and the bar is a lot higher, I think.
I think the short story is always a beautiful little piece. It has to be so economic and so tight. The best ones are really brilliant. So that's good.
Agreed.
Well, this was a great conversation. Blake, do you want to say anything to finish this out? I think we got one. Antonio, you're an amazing question answerer. And Oscar, your questions were so rich. It was a great dialogue, as Blake was talking about. And it's 8:35, so I'm very cognizant of the fact that, like, if you didn't eat dinner, you might be really wanting to right now, and it's a Friday night, and we should free everyone to to continue from here. But this was really wonderful.
Congratulations to whoever organized this. This is really great.
Oh, thanks, Hannah. That means a lot. So Blake, any final words?
Well, I mean, I've been looking forward to this for a while. I was just so happy to be in the audience, and thank you for coming on tonight to discuss your work And like I said earlier, just for letting us be flies on the wall for that candid conversation, which if you're a reader or you're a writer, that is just nourishing to be able to kind of sit in. And I mean, that's why I think we don't mind sitting here for an hour and a half. So thank you for letting us be part of your process, letting us know what's coming next. And I did just put in the chat just links to more events. We have stuff at Gemini Inc. and at Writing Workshops Dallas. If you're curious about that, those links are there. Yeah, thank you all for being here. What a way to spend a Friday night. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it. You are
Thank you,
amazing.
Oscar, for making it.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's
Keep
get
Happy
to-
holidays.
Stay safe,
Happy
everyone.
holidays.
Yeah. No, thank you for this great Friday night, like literary food. It was great.
Yeah, seriously.
How could we get the email or connection to the writers if we want to send notes or communicate with them?
Well, is your contact information on your websites individually?
I'm very easy to get a hold of through UT. I'm the easiest man to find through UT
UT
Austin.
Austin, okay.
Oops, sorry. I sent you. Give me 1 second.
You're gonna put something in the chat, Antonio?
Yeah, but I just sent it to Oscar.
Oscar, are you on faculty at UT Austin?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
That's my Twitter handle. If you go there, you can find my.
Hi, Twitter. I might bump into Trump.
Don't worry.
The Supreme Court just didn't even hear their case today, by the way.
Yay. Thank God.
This is so fine because it's outside of the bullshit stuff on the politics that's bouncing all over this every station, you know. It's just,
I know. Can you believe how consumed we all are by politics? Have you guys been so consumed with politics? Or is it just as we get older?
I've never
as we
been
get
this afraid
older?
for our democracy.
It's ridiculous.
Cool.
Do you
No,
remember
this
when
is
it
kind of the anecdote